Hello and welcome. I'm Robbie,
I'm Jay.
I'm Sam.
and you're joining us for episode 26 of Generations Apart, the show where we chat about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're very excited to have a guest with us today, former opera singer, recruiter turned professional Microsoft Cloud Solutions architect, Sam Smith. We'll be discussing his background, his interest in technology, and diving into today's topic, Microsoft Copilot. We'll be discussing our thoughts on Microsoft's plans around Copilot and generative AI generally. But before we get into that though, Jay, what's piqued your interest this week? We've got 3, so limited time.
I understood. So I have brought you the OWO. I'm going to say that's how it's pronounced. I know you're going to bring it up on screen if you haven't already. This specific version is the Assassin's Creed Mirage Edition, which has been created in anticipation of the new Assassin's Creed coming later this year. I'd never heard of this device before, but it isn't unique to this Assassin's Creed version. There is a €499 generic product, and what this OWO is effectively a haptic feedback. I'm going to call it a suit, but it's really only a top, and it basically is designed to enhance your gaming experience. It supposedly has a long-lasting battery, multiplayer capability, which I assume means you can buy multiple of them and wear them together. It's fully wireless. Apparently, it's adaptable. It works across a number of platforms, which is pleasing. So it's not just VR, it's console, PC, even mobile and tablet. And it claims, which tickles me, it says here, add new sense to your game. Make the game more immersive by adding a whole new technology. Feel a gunshot, the wind, or someone grabbing your arm, even a hug from a loved one. I don't know how you feel the wind through a haptic feedback, but I thought it was fascinating. I'm just really interested in how games and experiences with technology can become more immersive. And this is the first time I think we've ever really seen one aligned specifically to a gaming franchise. It's a special edition version. It's just the fabric that looks different, to be honest. I don't think it does anything different than the normal vest. But a cool product, and I thought I'd share it with you.
Very cool. I'm trying to think what kind of game would have wind associated with it. I guess maybe if you're diving from a building or driving a car.
I mean, I don't know how that works because, as far as I'm aware, it's haptic feedback, not fans. So I don't know how it simulates the feeling of wind. I'd like to try it. It's one of these things that I probably can't afford to justify €500 on a product like this. But if someone was to send me one, I'd certainly give it a go. But it looks interesting.
Yeah, I like it. I don't know about feeling bullet wounds, bullet kind of hitting you though. I don't know if you've been to a 4D cinema before, but it can be pretty jarring during an action film where you get like kicked in the back and stuff. I'm not sure I'd like that.
Well,
in a
it's
game.
not the first product to offer that kind of interactivity. So they've been for quite a number of years now. There've been vests that you can put on that connect to your PC to sort of simulate bullet impact, but nothing that I think is quite as refined as this. That uses haptics, and it looks like it's able to provide much more. I'm going to say a horrible word, but like delicate sensitivity, rather than just punching you square in the chest, and saying bullet.
Yeah.
I get the impression this is a bit more, like I said, if you can feel the hug of a loved one, how does that work? Like, can it sort of squeeze you in certain places? I don't know, but I just thought it was really interesting, and it caught my eye because it had been advertised and aligned with the new Assassin's Creed, which as a AAA franchise, it's not like an indie game that's going to pick this up. So whoever these OWO guys are that have produced this product, they're aiming big with a product like Assassin's Creed. So
Very cool.
Interesting.
What do you think, Sam? Up your street?
Yeah, I just think so. It's about 500 quid starting.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm just sort of thinking, if you sort of like get that in a VR experience, it probably doesn't even need to be that, as we were saying, delicate or sensitive. If you're in VR, even just sort of the little bit of haptics that you get, even with your hand controls, it's going to be really immersive. I'm just sort of thinking, to justify that on top of a decent VR rig, just feels quite punchy. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's one of those. VR, I think, is probably the obvious application for it, but it's not. They're not pigeonholing themselves. They're trying to go broad strokes here in terms of the different hardware that you can support with it. But yeah, I mean, and actually in VR, there's probably already a number of other devices that are attempting to do the same thing.
Yeah.
But as I said, I don't think it's entirely original. I just think it's interesting that they're trying to break out with and align themselves with a AAA franchise, which is unique because these sorts of devices tend to be very niche. They tend to be for the enthusiast who've got disposable income to earn on this kind of stuff, or just a sort of desperate urge to be involved in that space. I think if you start tagging yourself along to something like Assassin's Creed, which is very sort of mainstream, maybe they're trying to target a broader audience, but who knows?
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
cool.
very cool. So, Sam, this is your first time joining the podcast, and it's obligatory. You have to have a piqued interest. So, what have you brought to us this week?
Yeah, so I don't know if I've really kept the AI theme powder very dry. But yeah, so I brought Google's medical AI chatbot. It's already being tested in hospitals. So this is it's described as a GPT-4 like language model that's, as far as I can tell, has basically just been trained on a load of medical exams and obviously like question and answers, and then the answers have been provided by actual clinicians. And then it's basically been sort of trained to that degree, and now is in use. I think it's the Mayo Clinic in the States that are then sort of trialing it. Again, I don't believe that they're actually making actual diagnosis on it, or diagnoses, whatever the plural of diagnosis is. But yeah, I find this absolutely fascinating because my first reaction to it was like, oh, how could you possibly do that? That's ridiculous. And then you start like working through all the sort of like reasons that this is a good idea in terms of that. Yeah, so if I feed something this many parameters to then be able to make a diagnosis, you're probably going to, if you sort of average, you're going to get a consistent sort of basis for these diagnoses as well.
Yeah.
Instead of, well, I can imagine sort of the whichever doctor you get in whichever scenario, obviously you're going to, whatever the quality we want to say about it, the sort of the results are going to vary massively. Whereas they've made it sort of sit a bunch of different medical entrance exams and stuff, and it all sort of, rates very highly and passes in the sort of 78% plus. But yeah, in terms of sort of like hands-on, I feel that this is the kind of what people fear the most in terms of AI taking over, in terms of it kind of coming into healthcare. So yeah, I found it very, very fascinating that it's already been trialed.
Yeah.
There's an interesting quote in the article you've shared as well. It says, in the study, physicians found more inaccuracies and irrelevant information in answers provided by Google's MedPalm and MedPalm 2 than those of other doctors. Still, in almost every other metric, such as showing evidence of reasoning, consensus-supported answers, or showing no sign of incorrect comprehension, MedPalm 2 performed more or less as well as the actual doctors. Which, aside from it seems to make things up, which is the hallucinations piece. That's pretty exciting and scary.
Yeah, hallucinations definitely scary. You don't want that as part of your diagnosis, do you?
Yeah, you get put to sleep, you wake up with missing a leg, and the AI decided you need a limb removed. There's nothing wrong with you.
But also, this is one of the first kind of out in the wild examples I've seen of Bard. Lots have been talked about OpenAI and ChatGPT, but this is the first one I've seen from Google really that's hit the headlines at least.
Yeah, and their sort of, I don't know, their sort of public persona in this space has been very responsible and very sort of, we're taking our time and we want to, whereas obviously we'll come on to this later in the episode, right? But in terms of Microsoft and OpenAI have been just sort of shouting from the hilltops, getting stuff out there. But yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating. It'd be interesting. I mean, what is the next step beyond trialing it? I'm presuming at the moment they're just kind of using it as sort of like a check. But I think again, sort of for using it like to create sort of like a summary document of someone's medical history, all of those kind of things. But I was trying to think, well, would I trust someone who's using that kind of tool? And you sort of think that we're all human, and to think that to be able to kind of like take in however many different parameters you would need to give the correct diagnosis. We often hear about people being misdiagnosed with etc. because there's actually some random symptom that someone didn't sort of maybe sort of rank in the right way. So yeah, really, really cool. It'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Do you think it'll be like an enhanced WebMD eventually. Some kind of web service that you can diagnose yourself. Hopefully a bit more accurate. You're not going to come out and
It'd be
you're going to
frighteningly
die
dangerous,
tomorrow.
that would, wouldn't it?
Exactly what it's going to be, yeah. But they did, I think, interestingly, Google are already sort of saying that it's going to be great in sort of emerging countries where sort of access to medical professionals isn't as easy. Which again is just that it's getting to the point of where you just trust it as law, basically, that this is correct. Which, for it to be useful, I guess we're going to have to.
Yeah. Especially in those countries where there are limited options, there's very little choice otherwise to trust it.
Slightly aside, but I guess in leaning into that theme of trusting AI, have any of you seen the new Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning?
No.
No. So go with me. Sounds like a strange link until you understand. I went into the film. I saw it at the weekend. I went into it completely blind, just knowing I was going to see a Tom Cruise Mission Impossible action flick. Good enough for me. It's all about AI, and it's about a sentient AI called the Entity, which basically has gone rogue and has now effectively spread itself globally, and is doing exactly what we're describing. It's making key decisions, but it's doing so in such a way that it's driving and influencing human behavior in order to make humans do what it wants them to do. And it's it's a Hollywood blockbuster, so they take the concept a bit far. But I have to be honest, I sat there for this 2.5-hour film, which I thoroughly enjoyed, by the way. Definitely go watch it. Just thinking, this feels just a tiny bit too close to home. With everything we're reading, especially if you're in the space that we are, kind of working with these tools, following the progress, it's frightening. When you see a concept like this in the movies, and okay, it's over dramatized perhaps, but it's really interesting. And actually, I've been reading a book as well called Life 3.0, which is all about artificial intelligence. It was actually written before GPT was kind of made available, and in that, a similar concept is kind of brought to the fore around the idea of AI going rogue in the future and becoming kind of beyond our reams and beyond our control. But anyway,
without knowing, Jay, you've teed me right up for my article.
I genuinely didn't know, so I'm happy with that.
I really
piques your interest.
Yeah. So, I don't know if you saw this in the news, but the UN press, there was recently had a presentation of some AI robots on stage. So humanoid style robots dressed in clothes and have facial features and can do facial expressions and things like that. So that they're on stage, and the idea was that they would put them in front of the press, and the press could ask them questions while the creators are sat next to these robots. And it's an interesting article. I'll link it in the show notes. But a few of the responses to the questions kind of lean into your fear, I guess, of AI taking over. So a couple of the examples were a humanoid robot, Amica, was asked if it would rebel against its creator, Will Jackson, who happened to be sat right there. And the response was, "I'm not sure why you would think that," said Amica.
Wasn't a no then?
Always trying to cover
it. It wasn't a no.
Question there. Is she a politician bot?
And she continued with, "My creator has been nothing but kind to me, and I am very happy with my current situation." And the fear around that statement is more on the emphasis on current situation, and what actually happens if that changes. So yeah, just to emphasize a bit of fear on that.
Do you know what that smacks to me of? There's two things that's making me think of. Again, Hollywood, so blame Hollywood for this, but iRobot, because I'm sure the robot in that movie gets a similar grilling, and it talks about its creator as being someone that was nothing but kind to it. And the other one, in looking at that picture, I want to say, is it Ex Machina?
Yes.
Something to that effect, which is all about the AI that sort of lures the
try and pass the Turing test.
Yeah, and then escapes and shuts the humans in the home and leaves. That first picture that you were just showing then at the top of the article, the one on the right, that was my instant thought was, oh my God.
It's spooky, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Amica was also asked whether it would lie. And it said, "No one can ever know for sure, but I can promise to always be honest and truthful with you." So not a lot of trust in that response, really.
Yeah, neither one of those answers is really putting the audience at ease there, is it?
Definitely not.
That's scary.
But the
Sounds a
high,
little bit consultant that doesn't want to commit to anything. I quite like it.
yeah,
It's just like, well, to the best of my knowledge, at this current moment in time, I think that could possibly work for you. Yes.
it's the
Go-
classic. It depends. Eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so other highlights included a one of the other robots, Sophia, saying that humanoid robots could lead to a greater level of efficiency and effectiveness than human leaders. So basically saying that they would be better world leaders. These
I
robots.
like that. Trying to sell themselves in, like it.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I mean, what are they if they're comparing themselves to current world leaders? They're probably thinking that's an easy job, isn't it? Looking at the
yeah,
last 5 or 10 years of
yeah.
global leaders, they're like, wow, this is an easy job. Surely we can be better than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, which is odd because another robot followed up with they were adamant that they would not be replacing any existing jobs, which, they said they wouldn't lie, and there you go.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Wow. How did we get into the robot apocalypse from wearable haptic suits? It's been an
It's just Mission
interesting few
Impossible
articles there. Yeah.
in real
Mission
life.
Impossible.
I think that the scaremongering AI is going to take over the world. It's had a real sort of shot in the arm from that's the best thing that ChatGPT has done. Has
Yeah.
enabled the sci-fi genres just to tap in and kind of go, yeah, you might have forgotten about this. We're going to bring this right back to the fore.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
last heard it in the mid-noughties, but then we're now going to bring this back to you now. I mean, it's a bit more real.
There's going to
What's
be
interesting though, to that point though, is that Mission Impossible movie's got to have been in the works for what 2, 3, 4 more years.
Yeah.
At which point, at least on the scale it is now, ChatGPT, kind of generative AI was not something anyone was thinking about. So their concepts were a little bit probably more far-fetched. You fast forward 3 or 4 years to the kind of release date, and the whole world is talking about the idea that this AI could, at some point, be super intelligent.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it probably feels a lot more real now than it ever could have done in the last sort of 5 or 10 years. Perfect for them from a marketing point of view, because everyone's going to be watching this going, oh my God, is the entity ChatGPT? Is that where it all starts? It's this, when do the Terminators appear? It's Skynet, etc. It's fascinating. But
It is.
I personally, I'm all up for more sci-fi that leans into this, because I find it fascinating and I love these ideas of what would happen if the AI was to go this way and what that would mean for humanity. And I quite like all these visions, even if some of them are a little bit dystopian and a bit worrying. I just think it's fascinating to see how people extrapolate the AI's role in the economy, the world, and how that changes the world. I think it's fascinating to read about. So
Yeah, it feels
Anyway.
very Black Mirror. I
yes,
can see an entire season just being on generative AI or AI generally.
It's fun with putting hands together. It's much more material to bring to the next series. Yeah.
100%, 100%. I'll round it off with the last quote from one of the robots, and it was a pop star robot called Desdemona. And she was asked about the expansion of AI and whether humans should be regulating it more effectively. This robot responded with, "It's time for the AI revolution. Let's unite and use the power of artificial intelligence for the good of all humanity. Together we can create a world of understanding and harmony and make the universe our playground. My great moment is already here. I'm ready to lead the charge for a better future for all of us. And together we'll explore the depths of the world and our universe. Let's get wild and make this world our playground."
That's
Yeah, yeah.
What do you say to that?
I don't know.
I mean, part of me's the cynical part of me's going, that was all just primed. These things have been kind of teed up to say exactly that. But I wonder what if this is all true and there's genuinely the responses that robots gave. I wonder how freaked out the engineers are in the background watching this unravel, going, "Oh, good God, what have we done? Shut them down now."
I was expecting these all to be kind of like various shades of like Greta Thunberg, like from the UN, and instead we've kind of got this crazy dystopian,
Yeah, it was. It's definitely an interesting. I mean, there's clips as well on the article, so definitely check those out as well. But I think the weirdest thing or the creepiest thing would be how much of that was prepared and how much of it wasn't, and it was spontaneous from the robot's response. And if the creepier bits were the spontaneous bits, that's the stuff that's worrying. and the scripted stuff was actually the, together we can create a world of understanding and harmony. But then the improv bit was my moment is already here, and let's turn the world into our playground. Yeah, spooky.
It's like time for words is over. It's time for action. That's it.
Yeah. The article finishes off with, now I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle. A little Terminator reference.
I like it. I like that. Oh well. Shall we get stuck into the show? As we'll end up spending far too long on our piqued interest, as we often do.
Fascinating as always, though.
We're going to start, Sam, by letting the audience get to know a little bit more about you. We are, between me and Robbie, probably way too open and honest over the last 25 episodes about our own personal likes, dislikes, and sort of habits in the gaming and tech world. So we'd like to find out a little bit about you. So I'm going to ask you, if I can, just a couple of quick questions before we get into Microsoft Copilot and dig into that. First of all, Sam,
find something a little less dry than Microsoft Copilot. I think that would be
and a little less scary than the robot apocalypse. So
somewhere in the middle,
Sam, if we can, with your first memories of tech or gaming, perhaps something that you owned, a family device. What got you into it ultimately?
So I have very early memories of this BBC computer that my brother had, and it came with these discs that you couldn't have near to the monitor because it would wipe the actual disc. It was like this kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It was kind of this like mix of like a CD-ROM and a floppy disk. It was a really mega weird proprietary stuff. So I remember that the original Game Boy that I couldn't fit my hands around. That was really, really cool. And then also the NES. And just sort of like, even now, sort of think back to these games where basically just the background's moving, various different car versions, and you sort of had this like controller, which was like the least ergonomic thing that's ever been invented, the NES controller, where it's literally just completely square. And you kind of like kids don't know they're born these days. So you're just like literally like cramming into the corners of your hands, and like after an hour, you've kind of got these imprints left on your hand forever. So it's funny though. Is anyone else thinking about this just then? It's like very Nintendo heavy. My household growing up. Those are my earliest memories of tech.
Interesting.
You and me get on.
Yeah, I was going to say you and Jay.
Not so much.
I was, I suppose, Sega early days, but Jay always asked me Nintendo questions, and I just can't answer any.
You see, the Mega Drive, now that, in comparison as a controller, that was ergonomic. And I remember sort of like, as a kid, it was that kind of dividing point. If you had like a 6-button Sega Mega Drive controller, that was a really big point of differentiation.
Yeah, they were weird, weren't they? Because I think out the box they just came with the 3-button, the ABC, and then they started selling ABC XYZ. Was it? I think.
Yeah, exactly.
The three additional buttons that suddenly appeared.
Ever so slightly smaller, little gallery above, just of XYZ.
Yeah, that's really odd, isn't it? And I mean, even and like you said, the NES controller, not comfortable to hold at all, but very simple as well in terms of the amount of buttons. It was literally a D-pad, 2 face buttons, and I think start and select. And that was about it.
Yeah, I think I had a start and select.
Needed. Yeah. No shoulder buttons, which I something else as well. Modern day controllers. What do you call the buttons on modern day controllers? Because they used to be start and select, and that was universal. And then Xbox tweaked them, PlayStation changed them. Now it's like the hamburger menu and the 2 overlapping squares on the Xbox.
The share button.
The share button now on the PlayStation. They've just messed it up. And then, of course, no one can put X in the right place. Everyone's got X in a different place on their buttons. It just drives me around the bend.
It's okay, though, because on PlayStation, X is A, really. So
But A is not A on a Nintendo controller.
True.
So A on an Xbox is in a different place to a Nintendo. You can see why gamers have a hard time. Anyway, so Sam, it sounds like you're a man of a similar generation to me. If you remember the NES and the Game Boy, bring it forward to today. What is in your backpack, or what is your current tech stack? What's your chosen weapons?
So it's grossly out of date. So I'm still running a PlayStation 4. In COVID, I kept trying to get a PlayStation 5. I've just kind of stuck with a PlayStation 4. And then in terms of like PC, I basically run just various gaming rigs in the cloud that I subscribe to.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's just like kind of, again, I really like just being able to, it sounds really boring, but get Flight Simulator running at its absolute peak Yeah, love it. Yeah, so I've got sort of like maybe 2 or 3 machines running.
So how does that setup work for you? Because we did an episode quite a while ago now, all around sort of cloud gaming and sort of cloud architecture. As a cloud solution architect yourself, you must know about this stuff very well. What have you set up there? How does it work for you?
So got various different things running in Azure, all on my own personal account, obviously. But yeah, I just like the idea because I think the thing is, back in the day, I would sort of like invest so much of my own money into a rig, and then it'd just be completely out of date within a couple of years. Well, within a year, basically.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. It works pretty well, and I think in terms of latency, it's kind of like it's playable. It's not like I'm kind of like trying to play like shooters for any money, for anything like that. So for the kind of things that I play, although sometimes like if you're playing like a racing game, that kind of even that tiny bit of latency can really, just kind of not happy days at all. But yeah, because like most of the things I play, they're kind of immersive, like one person simulators of sorts, where it's either sort of like F1 or FIFA or stuff like that. So yeah.
So it's an Azure server that can play games.
It's like Azure VM, yeah. Just spin it up with a really good GPU. Yeah.
I didn't know you could get like really good GPUs with Azure server. That's amazing.
Yeah, you can get some pretty good. There are like some friend of mine was trying to sort of suggest some kind of very gaming specific products that you can sign up to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got my little spinning up a VM and then
Very
get onto the done. Yeah.
I didn't expect us to find ourselves there. And Sam, we need to ask the question. We'll ask you a bit later on in our quickfire section. But your mobile phone, are you Apple, Android, something more obscure?
Android. Cool.
Yeah.
Android.
Yeah, it's got to be Android. So I had an iPhone 3GS. So exactly. So like the second 3G enabled iPhone. I think at the time, because it was the only smartphone which you could get 3G on. So that's kind of why I bought it at that point. I think it came down to I couldn't customize it. I couldn't really do what I wanted with it. And then my very next phone was a Samsung Galaxy S2, and you could jailbreak it and run an emulator on it. And so I was like kind of like running Mario Kart and Super Mario, like basically all these like N64 games, which were just like to be it for me to be able to play those on the bus or something. It was absolutely brilliant. And like it was when I used to live out in Gants Hill in East London. Someone like peered over and sort of looked at my phone, and I was like really deep into I don't know what mushroom cup, 500cc whatever. And it was just this like, what was that Mario Kart? And I was like, yeah, it is. So
Robbie knows exactly what's running through my head right now, because
Jay thinks all Android owners are criminals.
All Android users are criminals because you only have them to play illegal software. And you just literally played into my hands. You justified everything I said in that.
Most honest question. It's like, what phone do you use, Sam?
I'm well on your side though, Sam. I think I do have an iPhone, so I can't reach it.
It's not a genuine statement. Robbie's trying to label me so all the Android fanboys come after me.
I mean, I think that's inevitable anyway, Jay. You are an Apple fanboy. There's no hiding from that.
I am an Apple fanboy. Anyway, we're going to come back, Sam, and go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I totally get, I'm not like one of those people who's completely anti the ecosystem, kind of going, it's a walled garden. I totally get it just works. And I can't say that with the vast majority of my other products that I own, that they just work, because they just don't. But that kind of ability to customize and sort of run things and have a play with it, that was kind of like, the fact was it's only now that you can kind of customize the home screen beyond just, so you can actually have sections.
Yep.
It's one of these things. It was announced at it was announced by Tim Cook, wasn't it, or something? It was a really massive deal that you could do this. And it's like, this is what we've been able to do for literally the last decade on any other phone. Anyway, I'm not going to hate on Apple. That's not going to garner me any popularity.
You started by saying you're not going to hate on Apple, and then you took a massive swipe at Apple.
I'm here for it.
And then finished by going, but I'm not going to start on Apple.
That just means I'm not going to let you respond.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that. I don't need to. I'm comfortable in my walled garden. It's nice here. Everything just works. Yeah. Anyway,
so, actually, before we move on to the next question, then, so what's your current phone then?
So it is like it's a very bait. So I've gone through a spate of. So I run with my phone in my right hand. I don't have any kind of. I should just get a strap for it, but I just run with it and I faff around with it. Basically, tripped and fell. I've broke the last 3 phones I've had in the last space of a year. So I've stopped running expensive Android phones, sort of like basically Google Pixels.
Yes.
So I'm now currently running a Samsung A35.
Nice.
It's fine.
Solid
It's
phone.
fine. I fully respect that it's going to probably not be with us this time next year. So that's basically the reason for that.
Nice.
Do you not just need a smartwatch?
I'm going to let the silence do the talking. I mean, that would be a really good idea.
Anyway, right. I'm going to come back to you at the end of the episode, Sam, with another couple of quick questions and a quick fire round for a bit of fun. But I think it's probably about time I hand back to Robbie to get stuck into the topic of the show, which is Microsoft Copilot.
Yeah, great. So today we're chatting about Copilot, and we've got a couple of starter questions to get us chatting about, what it is, and what we see the future of that being within Microsoft, and how it relates to all the other Gen AI stuff that's been in the news lately as well. So let's start with, what is Copilot? Sam, what is Copilot to you?
What is it to me? Well, I think it's turned into this kind of massive umbrella term for basically a set of kind of specialized chatbots that are embedded across the Microsoft 365, or you used to call Office 365 stack. And I think the main difference, I think what most people want out of generative AI now is this: yes, everyone can type in a prompt to ChatGPT or Bing Chat, etc., and they're going to get back either something that's contextual or basically something that everyone else has access to. But everyone kind of wants the power of Gen AI, but over things that matter to them. So whether it's basically over their own data. And what Microsoft, I think, it's an interesting one because they came out of the gate so quickly after obviously ChatGPT just storming to 10 million users in some ridiculous, unprecedented amount of time. But what they've kind of done is they've sort of taken those large language models, and they have their own sort of privately hosted instance of those models in sort of your data centers. But the idea is that instead of having to train those models on, let's say, sort of like a Robbie and J Corp on Robbie and J Corp's data, is that actually what they do is they kind of make a little call, and they'll kind of go, so Robbie's asked me to summarize his schedule for this week. So then it sort of goes off, instead of just obviously asking the language model, which won't have a single clue about Robbie's wonderful schedule. It goes to Robbie's calendar, and it sort of goes, right, I see he's got an appointment with Sam and Jay to record this podcast at this time, and all your various other appointments. And then kind of goes to the language model, gives it a load of information, and then the power of that language model kind of goes, right, I see all these little bits and pieces that I need to stitch together, and then I'm going to turn it into something that's human readable. There's some less sexy, interesting stuff around security. So it's all that kind of thing that Robbie can only see and access things that he's got access to. And then it kind of comes back into the language model. But I think the PowerPoint one is probably the coolest one because it's got some DALL-E 2 in there as well. So in terms of like image generation. But I think it'd be fair to say, like, there's also ones that they're embedding into Dynamics 365, which is like Microsoft's business application suite. But yeah, they're also like these little specialized chatbots that kind of basically go off and grab pertinent information to the query and then send it to a large language model similar to ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's a very interesting timing, I think, for all the announcements around it. You're absolutely right. But so I was lucky enough to be at the European Power Platform Conference a couple of weeks ago in Dublin, and a lot of the Microsoft representatives were there. And I was surprised that the entire event, all they were talking about was Copilot, as you can imagine. But I was surprised that they actually came out and said that they'd been working with OpenAI since, like, I think it was 2018. They've been working with them for a very, very long time. And you can imagine how quickly the deal went through. It can't have been, as ChatGPT 3 launched, that they just wrote up a contract. So they must have just been working with them for ages. And then timing-wise, must have announced it to the market just, I guess, as part of marketing. But it's worked incredible for them because it's, you think OpenAI is now synonymous with Microsoft, especially the tools that they offer, and Copilot as well. So yeah, interesting timing.
It's really interesting timing, and you'd kind of I remember it coming out and just sort of thinking, how can they have something ready? And of course, there's sort of like the co-investment and all of that kind of wonderful stuff. They've obviously got that relationship. I do find it very interesting where sort of in the Power Platform space, Microsoft have been trying to infuse AI in this space for some years. They have a sort of their own product called AI Builder, which is basically kind of like a maker friendly, kind of like easier to interact with and kind of integrate AI into your applications. But yeah, I think it's been fair to say it's been quite well documented that the sort of the Microsoft AI team, there has been a little bit of friction in terms of the OpenAI and all of those models and how those models are then brought into the Microsoft stack. Obviously, that's where kind of all the attention and all the fundings has gone, and then all of the kind of sort of like the research side of their sort of traditional research and development team, which do some really cool stuff in their own. I think like the Orca model and sort of bits like that. They're doing some really interesting stuff in the space in their own right. But obviously, I think they've obviously completely sort of hitched the wagon onto OpenAI. Yeah, which it had me thinking the other day. Sort of, it feels almost like the first real sort of public iteration of like Satya Nadella's kind of open, lovely sort of we're really cool Microsoft.
Yeah.
It doesn't strike me as something that Steve Ballmer would do. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah.
In terms of like partner up with a company. So it seems like very sort of like the first kind of really public iteration of this new Microsoft partnering up as equals with another company in this space.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, to that point, if you'd have talked about Bing as a competent search engine, even like 6 or 12 months ago, you'd have been laughed at by most techies and probably most people, everyday people, because obviously we refer to searching the web as Googling it for a reason. Google cornered the market.
Yeah.
But Bing with the GPT technology and that new enabled Bing chat, I mean, even some of the staunchest techies I've spoken to or heard from are saying Bing is now feeling like a competent, arguably, perhaps to some better platform for searching and accessing data on the web than Google and its products. And it does feel like Microsoft getting ahead of the game here has taken perhaps boring old Microsoft. Microsoft were great at making things for you to do your job at, weren't they? Oh, we can make great spreadsheets, we can make great XYZ. And to most common people, general everyday users, Microsoft's that thing they use at work. But perhaps Apple or Google is the thing they use when they go home. I feel like now Microsoft, as you mentioned, have kind of got that slightly cool, maybe slightly edgy feel about them where they're doing something exciting. They're now at the forefront of something that people are talking about, and it's almost changed the game for the brand in a way that perhaps we wouldn't have been thinking about 6 or 12 months ago.
I think it totally has. And like that was the sort of and the things that I still kind of have to remind myself, like, okay, I'm just going to like perform a normal web search. And I sort of go, why am I doing that? Makes absolutely no sense. And it's sort of and obviously as you still get that kind of like quite mixed range of results. But so me and my wife were looking at summer holidays and we sort of asked it to produce an itinerary to go to Sardinia between these two dates and also suggest flights, and we don't want these kind of times. Absolutely ridiculous what it could chuck back out.
Yeah.
Like and the amount of time that it saved across all of those. But yeah, it's just saying, James, that's like kind of like I probably well, actually to be fair, 6 years ago I was not in IT professionally, so I wasn't really using Microsoft products anywhere at all. But as you're saying, it's that you would not think for a holiday I am then going to go and sort of perform anything to do with Bing, like whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I think to be fair, Bing has probably been getting a lot better in the background. It's just obviously to kind of break into, I can't remember that like their market share of the search market space was absolutely laughable, and probably even to get even they could have made it twice as good as Google's product, but no one was ever just going to kind of just go, great, I'm now going to go Bing that. I just remember once or twice did an interview for Microsoft Learn, and I did get asked, "Oh, could you not say you Googled that, but could you say that you Binged it?" Doesn't sound right.
Search the web. That's the way to get around it, isn't it?
Yeah,
I just looked at the stats.
Right.
It's 2.7%, I think, of the market share in terms
Is that
of search.
all?
Really?
Although actually, no, I've just seen an image that says 6 6%, but definitely sub 10%, I think.
Is it 65% of all stats are made up? Is it something
Yeah.
like
50% of the
Yeah.
time, it's right every time.
I think you're thinking of Sex Panther, aren't you?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
50% of the time it works every
Leaning into the Anchorman again.
I was going to say though, you mentioned you like joke about how stupid it sounds to Bing something.
Yeah.
But I suppose to the generation before Googling something became
Mm.
the norm, to say I Googled it would have been just as weird.
Yeah.
It became a social norm, didn't it? It was that kind of breakout success. I think the other thing we've got here, and we can sort of lead on to one of the next questions, really, is I think a lot of people will continue to mix up GPT, Chat GPT, Bing, Bard when it comes out. I think Chat GPT has done such a good job of cornering generative AI
Mm.
that it's almost become the generic term for it, and people don't necessarily understand when they're using it correctly or incorrectly. So how is Bing and the Copilot that we're talking about differing from Chat GPT?
So Chat GPT in essence, and they are bringing out plugins, but it's very much like tied to the data set that it's been trained upon. So I think commonly when we all first started using them, in March of this year, it was the cutoff point was sometime in 2021. And then GPT-4 is like 2022. And I guess the thing that is really easy to forget is that when you're actually talking to one of these things, it's obviously all the pre-training that it's gone through, and we can all talk about how clever it is, and it's basically gone across the entire everything that anyone's ever said about anything. But of course, the actual resources to do that is incredibly expensive. It's like literally hundreds. I think it's like $128 million at least to basically train one of these models from scratch. So, and this is where, like, obviously, when I was saying earlier about that we wanted to be able to have this kind of generative AI experience over our own data, there's obviously a very small amount of companies that are just going to think about chucking 128 million quid into training on their data set. And by the way, they probably don't have enough data in the first place to train it.
Or in the right format, at least.
Exactly. All of those kind of things. So this kind of another sort of AI term that really trickles off the tongue is like retrieval augmented generation. But this kind of thing of like basically, I love it. But RAG, I like that.
That'll never take off. That's been taken.
It's going to take off again. But I think that kind of thing where sort of like saying, okay, are we democratizing AI? The whole idea of being able to kind of take sort of like a bit of information that you can then feed to the AI model, that tiny bit of information and how you feed that tiny bit of information can get you really, really close to something that you've trained and spent a huge amount of money on. And actually, when you kind of go sort of like the sort of like halfway house of like fine tuning, I think like the amount of time and effort and money that you'd spend on fine tuning a model versus basically in how you do it in software or like for a workflow to be able to go and grab the information that's important to you. And basically all you then is in a prompt to the language model saying, summarize this piece of text, tell me about James's diary today, create a proposal from these documents, all of that kind of thing. It's incredibly powerful. And I think sort of the software engineer in me sort of thinks it's a bit janky, like it's a bit hacky. But the results that people are getting from it, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think as well though, it's becoming democratized in the sense as well that you can access really specific information. So to your example earlier about the Google Bard on medical stuff, ChatGPT obviously is a huge model that was trained on across a bunch of different industries, but it looks like the specific ones I think are going to have a bigger impact perhaps than ChatGPT. Say like the medical ones for medical questions and I don't know legal ones for legal questions or what have you.
And those are the easier ones, right? So I think like the holy grail at the moment is this kind of general purpose AI, right? And so we can just have this one source of truth. Funnily enough, I don't know if it was in that article or another one I was looking about the Google MedPalm 2, was apparently GPT-4 also passed that medical exam. So presumably they trained GPT-4 on a similar data set, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think definitely in the short term, because as I said, there's not really a shortcut. It's like these transformers. It's not. Yes, they are incredibly clever, but there is an element of brute force about it. And that, as we're saying, it is just a load of GPUs spending a load of time, costing a load of money, and doing, as I said, everything running in the background is incredibly clever. But the cost to get those things moving is incredible. Well, it's just not practical for like 99% of companies in the world. But these kind of smaller focused chatbots, I think, as you're saying, they are going to be the sort of the next, and that's basically what Copilot is.
Yeah.
Smaller sort of, and interestingly, they don't really give you access to what we would call like the system prompt, or this kind of like, say, as I say, please provide me with an updates from yesterday from my notebook, etc. Probably to get the language model to give you something of use, there's a whole load of text and a whole load of setting the scene, and kind of like, it's the funniest things when you're interacting with these things and writing prompts in natural language, as opposed to in a programming language. And I think I said to James loads of times, I find it really funny how I often I say please, because apparently it's as a keyword where it does perform a lot better.
Really?
Supposedly, if you say please do the following, it then sort of is like, it's like a keyword that it works with. Similar to some of the roles that are kind of like deeply baked into the like you are an intelligent assistant. Or my favorite, with one of my consultants, I managed to get it to write a very nice marketing email about Dynamics 365 F&O in the style of Al Pacino. It was very, very good. I even fed it the exact film that I wanted it to mirror. It's great.
That is it's why it's become a bit of an art, this whole prompt engineering stuff. I saw an article the other day that was suggesting that it was running through an example where you could ask ChatGPT to generate a summary or like an FAQ for your business, and it started with a massive setting the scene thing where it basically asked it to ask questions. It said, in a moment I'm going to ask you to summarize my business or create a marketing campaign, but I want you to ask me 10 to 15 questions on my business that will give me the best response for the marketing campaign. And it was like, what's the name of your business? What industry does it work in? What kind of pricing? And it asked all those questions. You fill it out with a response, and then it's like, generate me a marketing request specific to my business. And it's just stuff like that. There's a lot you can do.
Yeah. There's a lot you can do.
Priming, is that what that's classed as? Is that priming the AI?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Wrong?
In essence, yeah,
that was something I saw. A few months ago, we talked about it on the podcast actually, which was a brilliant. It was a YouTube video I watched where a guy effectively primed ChatGPT with all the knowledge it needed to write better prompts for Midjourney than your average user would write for Midjourney. So it fed ChatGPT all the training material from Midjourney, and then told ChatGPT it wanted a prompt fit for Midjourney, but based on a very limited description that he provided. And then it would go off and write this elaborate, incredible prompt for Midjourney with like camera settings and much more descriptive words to bring to life what he was asking for. And then he fed it into Midjourney and basically he had one AI prompting another AI, and the outputs were spectacular compared to what his original prompt would have got him from Midjourney alone. It was really impressive. And I guess that's what people are doing, isn't it? Is they're kind of front loading GPT with things that it needs in order to get out of it a better tailored response.
Exactly. I guess also we're talking about what Copilot is. One massive one I've missed off is GitHub Copilot.
I was going to say that was the origin, right? That was one of the first.
Yeah. I remember signing up for that and just commenting, just like, and it's again one of these things as like a programmer. Do you really want to write that for loop? Is that really integral to you? And I think this is like a whole different, and it is generative AI, but that whole kind of thing as a programmer, kind of like, did you need to spend those 6 hours troubleshooting something that you just probably just in that moment, you're having a bit of an off day, just tired, it's just taking you a bit longer, or do you want to have those 6 hours of your life back doing something else? There's such a, I mean, was it the other day? It was to do with a very specific part of web scraping I was looking at, and I just kind of like, I've done this before, but whatever. Started from scratch with a prompt, and then I just tried to see it through to the end, and then I got got a traceback error. I just put the copied and pasted the traceback error into that same ChatGPT session, and it's just when it goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to error handle that the extension needed to be always being lowercase. I fixed it. Now try this." And then you could literally just feed it, and you weren't even saying, "I think this is the problem." It was literally taking out of the terminal, just putting it in, and just like go, and it goes. I love the human element of it. Just like, I'm so sorry to have inconvenienced you by basically writing this entire Python script for you and making one mistake. I'm really sorry. I think I've done this wrong. Here you go. But yeah, I think that's a whole other sort of thing for coding, and I guess also like, is it like an aide memoir, or is it just a point where loads of people are going to be producing code they don't understand, and then there's going to come the point where you can't prompt your way out of it. Like you need to understand it, which is good. I guess is a general theme, right? In it, like across any sector. But
it's true, and I mean, code in general is the way the languages have developed over the years. It's interpreting or it's translating machine level code into much simpler syntax. So maybe the generative version of that is just the next level of coding languages. It's just simplifying the actual logic and coding structure and that.
On the level of abstraction, right? It's next step above. I think that's a good point, isn't it? If you say to someone sort of like, "Oh, you shouldn't be prompting," it's like, well, the next thing is like, would you like to be writing assembly?
Yeah, that's like complaining that Python's too simplistic. It's too easy to write. It's like it's not as hardcore as some of the other languages or whatever.
I'm not that hardcore. I'm sort of like I sort of like look at sort of like people who are into C++. That's like one level too far for me. I just can't.
But that's where the origins are for Copilot. Then GitHub is, I guess, an extension to most text editors, where it'll generate, given a prompt, it'll generate the code for you, and it's trained on GitHub. So it's trolled through all the code on there, which is fed into that model. So it's pretty accurate and pretty good. I think as well, it might also be trained on Stack Overflow as a means of troubleshooting, which is, I think, it's another Microsoft. Microsoft owns Stack Overflow as well. I think I could be wrong.
No, I don't. I feel we need a fact check on that. I think quite possibly, but I definitely find with, especially say something like Python, where there is just so many blog posts, there is just so much of it out there for it to have been trained upon. Whereas if you go for something like slightly more obscure, that's where you can sort of see that it's like slightly struggles, and you kind of have to connect the dots a little bit more. Yeah.
So that's, I guess, the origins, and as we talked about before, Microsoft's, I guess, plan looks like they are focusing on little point solutions for generative AI, so or the Copilot at least. So you've got the one for each tool. So coding is GitHub. There's one for PowerPoint. There's one for individual tools within the Power Platform or Dynamics 365, as you just said. So it is. I think when I went to the conference, they said at the time they had 110 different Copilots, and they are treating them as individual Copilots as well, attached to each tool. And when there was some people who asked, is there a centralized place to, for all the settings and administer them? And I don't think there is. I think it's whatever the admin settings are for the individual programs. That's where you'd find the Copilot settings as well. And they are completely separate from each other, even though they're branded as this, Copilot.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I guess I would love to know in a bit more detail, kind of like whether it is really just passing in basically the context that it gets and a very simple prompt. The clever bit, I think, is the actions and the commands that it takes. And I guess that's probably why it has to be so specialized. So in PowerPoint, obviously, the actual going and creation of those slides, obviously there's content that's been fed into it, but to actually just execute that script, it needs to exist. It could probably generate its own script on the fly, but you know what I mean? It needs to actually be there for it to actually go off and do these things. And they've got to kind of come up with an exhaustive list of potential any commands. I was on a demo for, I think it was like an inventory app. And one of the biz apps leads at Microsoft was kind of like showing off, and look, wouldn't you just love to build an inventory app from a CSV file? No one really, I think they kind of haven't really pitched it right. No one sort of said, yes, please show me that inventory app. But it was very much, you can see that there's an element of like, you might be feeding it a certain set of data, but actually what's scripted at, and don't get me wrong, I think these are productivity tools for a lot of people. There will be a lot of people who can create apps with this tool that would never get to that point. They would never kind of get past the hello world thing. So I'm broadly a big supporter of it. But at the same time, I think there does come a point where it is just, I've been fed this information, and these are my sort of very, quite a small set of defined variables, and I'm going to create you this app.
Yeah.
Which is good, and it's a productivity tool, but it's not something that makes me go, oh God, that's incredible. But if I'm being honest, that's not the really interesting part of the technology for me.
Yeah.
Do you know what's really interesting is, and there was a quote, I don't know if you've been following all the, bear with me, this is going to sound really out there. If you've been following all the writer strikes and the actors strikes in Hollywood at the moment, so a lot of the argument or the pushback is that a lot of writers are being displaced, or that studios are now looking at investing in AI to write scripts, so they don't need as many writers and they don't have to pay them as much. And I think it's Simon Pegg who was quoted as something like, and there's a much more elaborate quote if I looked it up, but something along the lines of, all of these AI solutions are trained on mediocrity, so everything that they'll produce is mediocre. You're never going to get the kind of these bots don't have emotions, they don't feel heartache, they don't have past trauma to pull on, so you're never going to get that sort of creative expression from an AI. Do you think there's something in that, and does that apply here as well in terms of the Microsoft toolkit? Because to your point, it's going to produce you a mediocre app probably every time. Is there a limit to what the AI can do, and there's a certain reliance on the creativity or the ability of the human who's prompting or controlling it?
I think so. I think first of all, it's a really sort of like, compared to what you can do with other tools. So if you sort of want to get a bit more technical beyond sort of this implementation of Copilot and get into using Azure services and all the different types of abilities you have there to orchestrate this stuff, Microsoft are going to give you sort of like a managed set of settings, so kind of like be more precise, sound more funny, be more personable, etc. And those are all really good things, but I think the issue is that the kind of content that companies are creating is, by its very nature, we're trying to say this is how we're differentiating ourselves. And so then how do you differentiate yourself with a tool that everyone has? And yes, it will kind of it will kind of contextualize with your data. But I get your point, James, because it's kind of like, how do you create anything original when it's born out of basically kind of compiling in very clever ways in different combinations things that already exist? But then again, you can still say, well, anyone who writes anything, there's only so, you can make up a kind of like a silly word, but I used to think as a musician, I kind of like, we would like GCSE music, it'd be like kind of like, how can I create something original in like kind of Western music? Every single possible combination of notes has already happened. Like it has. Yes, it's got a little bit more existential, this chat now, hasn't it?
But I guess, and there'll come a moment in the video edit where there will just be numbers floating around my head and a look of confusion when you two are getting all into the coding, because hands up, not a coder. But for your average user, so let's take us back to what an average listener might see when this is implemented in their work or home computer. What kind of things am I going to be able to do with Copilot as an average Microsoft consumer?
Basically, and this is where I think it comes down to, you're basically going to be quicker and more productive at the things you're probably already doing. So I think that's an example I used earlier in terms of, please write me an email to a prospect about the following products and proposals, etc. The time for the sort of Microsoft Copilot to go to, let's say, maybe 5 or 6 different files, kind of grab all the sort of what it thinks to be the pertinent information, which from experience is really hard to do. So I'm really interested as to kind of how well that is implemented in terms of like the search behind the scenes. But I think from a high level, it's things like generating marketing emails. It's going to be creating spreadsheets over some example data and kind of, write me an Excel formula. But I think it's going to be sort of productivity boosting sort of things that you're going to be able to do, and that's going to be a bit massive value add, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the one thing we don't have enough, any of us have enough time of, is time. So, but yeah, I think it's just that kind of next natural evolution of the Microsoft 365 stack and people being more productive.
Yeah, a couple of examples just to add to that I'd seen is, point point Copilot at a couple of PDFs, as you said, a few different documents, and generate a slide deck summarizing the information or pitching for that project and things like that. And it'll use DALL-E, as you mentioned, as well, to generate some of the images on there, and that's a really cool one. And then they obviously at the Power Platform conference they showed off quite a lot of the implementation with the Power Platform. And the Power Platform, for those who don't know, is a set of low code, no code app builder tools. So you can do things like automated workflows and create customized look and feel apps. And they had this great graph on the screen when they were pitching it, and it had what it is now in terms of on the X and Y was the complexity of the user, the developers to the average user, and where the tools fit in with how easy it is for them to get started. And the line for the Power Platform just extended all the way to the more business user as opposed to the developer side, because they've implemented so many different Power Platform tools to be like, make every time I'm sent an email from this person, I automatically file all the attachments in this place on SharePoint, for example. And you just type that in and it'll create this automated workflow for you, and it'll just work straight away. And it's things like that open up way more productivity tools than perhaps were available before, but just because of the complexity of getting started. So I think that's actually quite exciting of Copilot as well.
So
I think the thing I'm really interested in is how much of that is going to be just kind of scenarios, known scenarios. So for example, as you were saying, kind of like take those attachments and put them into a SharePoint site for me. How much of it is actually the model ingesting the information and then kind of going, they've asked me to do this, I need to go and get these files. Okay, where am I going to put them? I'm going to put them in SharePoint. How much of it is, or is it just a huge switch statement of like going, I think they might want to put it into a SharePoint site, so therefore, basically execute these set of commands.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's the latter at the moment, but there's where the sort of other bits of the technology are going when you get into using like the Python libraries and things you can do with LangChain and kind of give it a set of tools. And this is the most terrifying part I've found, where you sort of like put together like a notebook, and it literally, and as it says, it goes entering chain, and it goes, I think I need to look up the employee information over here, so I'm going to go do that. It goes and does it, and then it comes back with an observation and kind of goes, I didn't find everything I needed from that tool. I think I need to go use this tool. And that's the bit where it gets very sci-fi for me. And as I say, I don't think that it's there yet, but at the same time, this is also a bit of a black box. And that comes with all the joys that it is kind of just taking care for you. You don't have to have an Azure OpenAI subscription. It's all just, in essence, going to work to a point. I think my argument for the future is that, again, it's all that everyone is going to have. So therefore, to get that actual point of differentiation, do you need to kind of be getting more into the custom side of the space?
Yeah.
I'm having a lot of fun doing the custom side of the space. So I would obviously say that, but I can totally see the sort of that, the value that you get out of it versus just how convenient it is, right? That's going to be the.
Can I ask a kind of like perhaps a closing question on this, because I'm conscious of time? So you talked about productivity gains. Who or what kind of roles do you think are going to benefit from this the most, and perhaps who's going to get too much time back and find themselves replaced by tools like this? What kind of jobs do you think are going to be seeing the most impact, good or bad?
So I don't think anyone's going to kind of just have all this time back and they're just going to sort of be sat smoking a cigar playing their favorite console. I think it just means that everyone's just going to do more. And probably sadly, it's just going to mean that everyone's expected to do more. That's my slightly sort of sad view on the world, probably, but I genuinely think that's probably what it's going to be, to be honest. I found that with writing code, where I'm sort of like faster, and so therefore I expect to achieve more that day, and you just kind of go next. I think, funnily enough, it's for Copilot anyway. I think with the control you have over the prompt, which isn't that much, I think probably for people who are actually generating content, it's going to get very obvious very quickly that something has been generated by Copilot. And actually, I think people are just going to be, no, that's not good enough. That's my view in a couple of months, years to come. But I think for things like just creating a quick PowerPoint, I think just any standard business user is going to get productivity gains. But I don't really know. I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm not sure if there's any one particular job role that I look at and sort of like go, your job is now going to not exist because of Copilot. Because again, it's the whole way that it's been marketed. It's this kind of thing of just sort of like, I'm just here to help you. I'm not here to take over you.
The new paperclip.
So, yeah.
What was the little animated paperclip used to get in Word?
Clippy.
Yeah.
Clippy, that's the one.
Clippy, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, and that is a horrible human trait, isn't it? We find ways to be more efficient, to create more time for ourselves, to find a better work-life balance, and then we fill that time with more work or more expectations. So I can absolutely see that happening, and I also completely agree that people will be able to spot something that has been generated with Copilot much more quickly than perhaps they will do right now, because everything will start to look and feel very similar. I think that'll then come down to how you prompt it, how you use it. And then I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily think that entire jobs are going to disappear, but I think jobs that are perhaps more admin-y, perhaps things like minuting meetings, long form note taking, action tracking, stuff like that, those kind of jobs will find themselves under pressure, at least, perhaps not removed, perhaps reduced in number, perhaps put upon, if you're a PA or a secretary, perhaps you're going to end up with more partners to support, or, because you can, like you said, maybe you can do more. You don't have to draft those minutes anymore and summarize them and take actions. Copilot does it for you. You don't have to spend ages analyzing spreadsheets. Copilot does it for you. That presentation they want for the weekend, Copilot can do the first 80% for you. So I think those are the roles that might suffer the most. I think those that require creative problem solving or expert decision making, probably less so. They will probably see more benefit than pressure. But I do think people on the sort of more administrative end of roles might find themselves more reason to be concerned.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's that idea, isn't it? Like I was saying, I don't really want to be writing that for loop, but there's plenty of parts of my job that I kind of go, do you know what? Actually, I could really save not spending the next 2 hours putting together this project plan. That is basically a set of inputs and outputs that I could have automated elsewhere anyway. But I think, yeah, I guess the sort of trying to flip it and be a bit more sort of like happy about it is that we are going to be released to do more interesting things. I think it's definitely going to probably take some of the mundane out of it. And yeah, maybe it's going to cause people to more focus on those creative points of differentiation. And maybe that's going to be a good thing. And then, as you're saying, things like, even Teams as it is at the moment, it's going to, even if I sat there religiously for 2 hours trying to kind of summarize a meeting, it's never going to be accurate to that same degree, right?
Yeah.
We're never going to get that.
I'm conscious of time.
Yep.
Shall we wrap up, Robbie, with a couple of quick-fire questions for Sam and then close us out? Because I think we could probably spend hours talking about this. I think we're all clearly very passionate about this.
It's been really interesting, but yes, we should move on.
It really has. Yeah, thanks, Sam. It's been really good. We'll move away from AI, unless, of course, the answer to the next question is AI. But one quick question for you in terms of looking forward to the future when it comes to tech or gaming, your choice. What's got you most excited about the short, medium, or long term? What's coming down the chain that's keeping you excited?
F1 Manager 2023.
F1 Manager 2023.
Nice.
I did not expect that to be your answer, but I'll take it.
I never used to really like these kind of like manager type games. I used to, but actually that's a bit of a lie. I spent an inordinate amount of time playing Football Manager. I was Championship Manager back in the day. I remember from the days when you didn't even get sort of like a little, sort of like the dots kind of moving around on the screen. It was literally just a banner.
Just a text.
And then you could sort of,
champ.
Yeah. And you could, exactly. And you could kind of just, and you'd get to a point where you would, where you could tell the sort of what the sequence is leading up to a goal either side. Yeah. So I would start getting so upset and distraught just over this tiny little banner when my like Valencia 1999 team were having a away day at Zaragoza.
I remember I too have probably lost many days of my life to that game, and Yeah, you almost become like Neo from the Matrix, you know, and he can see the Matrix in code, and he can read it and see the game. It's like that with Football Manager. You can read the text and you know what's coming.
You know what's coming, substitution and the halftime talk, and when you get given like maybe the 5 options, and someone's kind of give them a roasting, they need to hear it, and then they would go back out, and then everyone's like, it just looks like their heads have dropped. Smith hasn't said the right thing at half time. And you really take it there.
Your assistant manager in those games always mislead you.
Yeah. So yeah, F1 Manager for sure. I love all of the kind of the R&D where you're going to put your budget for. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Sounds good. Some quick fire questions for you, 5 in total, and we won't judge you. I think I know how the first one goes. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Apple or Android?
Android.
Ugh. Light mode or dark mode?
Dark mode.
Console gaming or PC gaming?
Hearts console gaming, head PC gaming.
Interesting answer. Mario or Sonic?
Mario.
Augmented reality or virtual reality?
Virtual reality. I want it full virtual. I don't want to augment what's already here. Why do that?
Yeah, total escapism. Get me out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd be fully in the Matrix.
Yeah, exactly.
Sam,
it's like
I'll hand over to Robbie in a second, but just, I guess, a last opportunity. Thank you for taking the time out to join us and share all your knowledge in this Microsoft AI space. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can sort of sift through the detritus of other Samuel Smiths on LinkedIn. But yeah, that's the best place to catch me. I keep meaning to start a blog, and I never do. But one day I will start a blog. But yeah, I like kind of posting, especially very much since March 2023, around AI on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll put a link to your profile in the description of this episode, wherever you're finding it. So please do go and find Sam and connect and share your enthusiasm for all things AI. Robbie, I'll leave it to you to close us out.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks again, Sam, for joining us today. And thanks to everyone else who stuck around to the bitter end. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, subscribe on there, and all good podcasting services as well. We're also trying to stream games now on YouTube, usually on Sunday nights. So check us out there if you want to see us play some Mario Kart or Fortnite like teenagers. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.